Ciao, Gianluca. Many thanks for interviewing me today, and thanks for your questions. I'll try and answer them as best as I can. Sadly, in English, because my Italian is pretty much limited to the words like ciao and bellissimo, bellissimo, the beautiful game. Right, to start off, you asked me a very relevant question, which is about my love of the Italian style of football called Catenaccio. I've always been very keen on football. My interest in football was fired when I lived in Sheffield, and Sheffield Wednesday reached the FA Cup final in 1966, which sadly we lost 3-2 to Everton after going 2-0 up. But I moved back up to Scotland, where I was seen as being English because I had an English accent. And one of my get out of jail cards was the fact that I was a Sheffield Wednesday supporter, and Jim McCalliog of Sheffield Wednesday scored the winning goal against England at Wembley to beat England 3-2. So all the Scots thought that was great, and I managed to bask in the associated glory of being not only a fan of Jim McCalliog, but having already got his autograph and photographs of him all signed and everything. So I started off very interested in football. I first saw an Italian side play in the flesh against Crystal Palace. I can't actually remember what the team was, but the forward for this team was Roberto Boninsegna, and he really impressed me as a player. He obviously had loads of skill, and the Italian side played with a very deep defence and concentrated on very fast breakaways, which I thought was brilliant. And they were obviously a league above Crystal Palace. Uh, I've always read a lot. When I was at school, I used to read about 5 or 6 books a week. So I read a lot about Catenaccio and the door bolt and the sweeper system, and possibly even having a screener in front of the defence as well to harass and harry the opposition before they could even get going to build up some momentum. And I thought I would model my play in table soccer. Notice I use the word table soccer and not Subutio, because in my day it was all table soccer, and Subutio was a bit of a slightly, I wouldn't say pejorative word, but it made it sound like a kid's game. And we're all very keen that it should be seen as a proper sport. So we never called it Subutio. So I thought I'd model my game on this, and I went to many extremes to try and work out how far I could take it. And my basic position or proposition was you only needed one person to score, and if you had more than one person in the opponent's half, that was one person too many. So my game was based on being able to take the ball from defence and deliver it to within 2 centimetres of my one and only striker, who incidentally I named Boninsegna, and from there he could either touch up to it, or if I'd done it really well, shoot directly. And of course, this left very little scope for any defensive flicks. So I perfected my game whereby I could pass the ball extremely accurately to within just 1 or 2 centimetres in front of my lone striker. And this worked very well. I think the reason it worked very well was not necessarily due to my technical brilliance, just the fact that nobody else was really using that approach. At the time, the Subutio advanced rules mandated that you had to play according to a Football Association recognised system: 4-4-2, 4-2-4, 4-3-3, things like that. And I got a lot of grief from referees and other players saying that the way I was playing was not playing fair, because I wasn't conforming to the rules as they understood it. So I typically try to line up uh, in a 7-2-1 formation, seven in the back line, two in the midfield, and my one lone striker, Bonin Senya. And whilst I wasn't able to do this necessarily from the kickoff, depending on the referee, I was able to do it from goal kicks. So that meant I could utilise my line defence. I think I was the first person ever to use line defence. Certainly, I hadn't come across anybody else in England or Scotland using it at that time, which was 1969-70. And I used to play the offside trap, and sometimes I'd have a sweeper just behind the line of seven, ready to flick up, so I could catch uh, an attacker in an offside position. So I think the reason it was successful was because other people weren't used to it and didn't really know how to deal with it. I think if there'd been lots of other players around using the same system, they would realise that uh, although there was only one striker, you probably needed to mark pretty tightly. You couldn't assume that you're going to get five or six defensive flicks to try and sort yourself out, because if the ball ended up 1 centimetre ahead of Bonin Senya, you weren't going to get another seven flicks. It was either going to be a goal, a save, or a goal kick. And that was how it usually culminated, if I got it right, which obviously I didn't always. So Catenaccio appealed to me, and it was echoed a bit by Leeds United in the UK, who had a very hard reputation as being very hard, very tough, and also quite defensive. And they also broke out to defence pretty fast as well. Although I wouldn't necessarily say it was pure Catenaccio. So that was your first question, Gianluca. So thanks for that. You asked me a lot of other things regarding, the players that I used, and the question you asked was, did I always use flat figures? And the answer is yes. I always use flat figures. Um, well, that's not quite true. I did actually start off using the Euro scale or continental figures, but when I went to my first Scottish Championships, which must have been in 1967-68, I noticed that all the top players used flat figures. So I pretty much consigned all my OO scale figures to the back of the cupboard from that day on, and practiced using flat figures. And in those days, we also used a large ball, which is considerably larger than and heavier than the one we use nowadays. Uh, there were two types of flat figures, and they both had different characteristics. One were the cardboard figures, and the other one was the slightly thinner plastic figures. The cardboard figures were slightly taller and had a tendency to be top heavy and fall over more frequently, which meant the game had to stop and you had to put them back up, which could be a bit annoying, particularly if you're trying to do something fast. Um, the the thin plastic flat figures span very well and had a slightly lower centre of gravity, and also benefited from the fact that if they just touched the ball with the tip of their head, it made a slight clicking sound. And sometimes, if you touch the ball very slowly or very gently, the referee might not see it, but if he heard it click, then it will be triangulated or corroborated by the sound. So he would say, yes, touch, proceed. And that cost me very dearly in an English match where I think all I needed to do was draw, and I'd have won the English Championship. And I lost the game. And I touched up to the ball, and the referee said, "You missed." I said, "No, I didn't. It touched." And he said, "No, no, you missed." And I went on to lose the game against Terry Edge 1-0. And instead of getting the draw, which was all I needed to win the league, I lost and ended up finishing third. So as a result of that, I decided that cardboard figures, although they're a bit more controllable and better in many respects, the fact that the referee couldn't tell whether he touched the ball because the cardboard made no sound when it hit the ball, I decided to switch to the thin plastic figures. I did experiment with the cardboard figures with painting the heads with varnish or paint, and that seemed to help a little bit, but it also made them even more top heavy. So not really that much of an efficiency gain really. Uh, and no, I've never really used polish. Obviously, I've used it since in other matches, but in my day, nobody used polish. The first time that I came up against polish was against the Italian Subutio team, and I noticed that Franco Zola and Stefano Beverini and all their players polished their bases and slid. And this was quite amazing to me. And I had one very interesting match against Stefano Beverini where I don't know which match this was, but it was a match where I might have actually I probably was playing with other scale figures, but whereas all his approaches, all his flicks were straight on, a bit like snooker shots, just sort of gliding them forward. I had my Bonin Sanya on the far left-hand side of the pitch, and he had a line of about 5 or 6 defenders, and the ball was just inside the shooting area, and I spanned my lone striker all the way round the width of the pitch. He connected beautifully with the ball, just touched it, and lined up perfectly for a shot, which I scored from. And I think I won the game 1-0. And none of the Italians that were watching the match thought that this was even possible. So I've got a huge round of applause for that. Um, in terms of the sliding and the polishing, the only thing that annoyed me at that time, and still does, is that according to the regulations, you're meant to flick the finger. It's not meant to be sliding the finger or pushing or nudging. And I noticed that with the polished bases, the tendency of those players who polished their bases was to not flick cleanly, but just nudge it with their hand, sometimes with the finger staying in contact with the man through the entire process, which in the leagues that I played in would have immediately resulted in a verbal warning and then a foul. But of course, that never happened. And that ended up with a huge argument between myself and Mike Thomas, who was refereeing, and some match. I forget who I was playing, but my point was that it was very difficult to compete if both players are playing to slightly different sets of rules, a bit like football back in the 19th century, where the idea of tackling and dribbling was centre, and the idea of passing the ball was seen as a bit of a weakness. And their main objective was to kick the shit out of the opposition, and if you got the ball, that was kind of a bonus. So no, I never really used polish in anger in any kind of live match. Right now, you asked me about my proudest moment. Well, that was quite clearly the Europa Cup final in Malta, and I won. Funnily enough, it was the 13th European Cup final, and my lucky number is 13, as denoted by the number 13 on my arm. It's also my wife's lucky number, and she's got an identical tattoo. I was a bit lucky. I had a real scare against one of the Maltese players when I was 2-0 and what I thought comfortably up, and then the psychological blow of conceding a goal and the nervous 2-1s, which is a well-known footballing phenomenon. The minute somebody pulls one goal back, nerves start to kick in. And my nerves at the time were when I panicked and got very nervous, my hand would start to tremble, and I couldn't flick properly because my hands were shaking. And this Maltese player, I've forgotten his name now, but he just attacked and attacked and attacked, and he was hitting the bar, I was making saves, all sorts, and I thought if he gets another, I'm dead, I'm out. And as the game was played in Malta, he had lots of his friends and supporters surrounding the table, all cheering him on. And as all the games were played at the same time, there was nobody around supporting me, so I really felt like I was under the cosh. Um, I managed to survive and got through by the skin of my teeth, but I'm pretty much certain that if he had scored, I would have lost. So I got away with it that time. I played Norman Gleave in the final, and I felt very cold, very rational, very logical, and I concentrated on system, luck, and practice. Those are my three main mantras for table soccer: system, luck, and practice. And my system worked well. I worked in the principle if I got a goal, I was going to win the game 1-0. My practice paid off, and I was doing really well in terms of position. And in terms of luck, Norman did have quite a few shots, but I was lucky that they all seemed to go the wrong side of the post. And that was probably due to a friend of mine, Stuart Goldman, who taught me how to play against Norman Gleave. And he said you have to pick these players up early on, or these figures up, I should say, and mark them quite high up the pitch. And that way it prevents Norman's very fast, straightforward sort of blitzkrieg into the shooting area. And this worked very well for me, and basically limited him to longer range efforts, which obviously had a lot less chance of scoring. So I ended up winning that game 2-0. I got a second, which just sealed the deal. You asked me about my most embarrassing moment, and this goes back to nerves, and this was the Subbuteo World Cup final, which was the year before. Now, that was played over a week in Munchen in Germany. There was a lot of TV interest. I was on Radio 4 every day for a week, tracking my progress. Every day I played, I guess, 2 or 3 games. I think it was group games, and then eighth finals, quarterfinals, semi-finals, and then the final. The final was a big event. It was, as I say, on Radio 4. Hamleys in Regent Street in the UK had the scoreboard detailing the match progress, and I played really, really well. And in the last minute, luck was with me, and I scored a goal. And 1-0 up with 1 minute to go. What could possibly go wrong? I got nervous. My hands started to shake, and Dick Riedfeld, my opponent, equalised from the kickoff. And at that point, I just felt psychologically shattered and felt doomed. And when the match went to extra time, he was a better player than me, to be fair, so I think the best player won. But he scored the winner, and I lost 2-1. At the time, obviously, I was crestfallen. I learned from that, and I think that helped me in the Europa Cup final the following year, which was the one that I really wanted to win. So, as I said, I was up glacial ice cold in the Europa Cup final, and I think losing the year before prepared me. And there's a lot of, if you read footballers' autobiographies and football managers, they often say that in order to be a good winner, you have got to learn how to lose. And I think that's true for anybody taking up the sport of table soccer, that if you start off, as I have done in chess and other sports, squash, etc., you're a learner and you are going to lose a lot in the early days. I watched the video the other day of some US beauty pageant queen who competed in the same tournament for, I think it was 7 years before she eventually won it. So accept the fact you're going to lose a lot in the early days and try and learn from each defeat and see what you could have done slightly better, whether it was retaining possession, shooting more, better block flicks, or whatever. So that was my most embarrassing moment, if you like, sort of going 1-0 up in the World Cup final in the last minute and then somehow conspiring to still lose it. Right, the last question you asked, Gianluca, was about table soccer in Asia, and I'm sporting my get the badge, sporting my Artemis Tigers table soccer shirt here. This is Bola Sepak, which means table football, and Mesa. And this is a club formed by a friend of mine here in Malaysia, which was fairly active about 5 or 6 years ago, and then sadly it just dissipated when the founder had to leave. So despite my best efforts, there's been no resurrection in Malaysia, and quite frankly, I don't see one now. I believe there's a couple of French players here. Some of the Malaysians remember playing it, and I got slightly interested. And a lot of my British friends here in Malaysia have heard of it, but not to the extent of having really played it in anger. Singapore, on the other hand, is vibrant, going well. They've got a number of guys down there that means that they aren't just reliant upon one or two. They've got 7 or 8 seniors who are enthusiastic, capable, good organisers, pretty efficient, apart from time management, pretty efficient, and they've got a very good and strong league, or several leagues, in Singapore. I competed in the Melbourne Open in February 2020, and there was a fairly large Singaporean contingent there. Australia seems to be doing pretty well. They've got clubs in quite a few different locations. I've met a few players from Japan, and they seem to be doing well. But in my local area, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, very little. I believe there's one or two clubs in Indonesia. I know 1 or 2 players in Thailand. But apart from Singapore, I'm afraid Southeast Asia is pretty much of a table soccer Subutio wasteland. Right, I hope that's given you a bit of an insight into my philosophy on table soccer and a few anecdotes about my history. So thanks again, Gianluca. I've got now the opportunity to use the first Italian word that I learnt, which apparently works both as a hello and a goodbye, and that's ciao. So ciao, and many thanks, Gianluca.